Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
When the cut page was added into DaVinci Resolve, it included the release of a hardware keyboard at the same time. So simultaneously, we had this editor, full Resolve editor keyboard, and the shuttle dial actually works to control those attributes in the cut page. When we released later the DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor, right, the smaller subset of that full editor keyboard, it also included the jog shuttle dial and the multicam controls and the direct trim controls on the left. Well, I've got the Speed Editor, and because it's Bluetooth, I've got it connected to my iPad. So I found that the Speed Editor combined with the cut page makes really short work of quick assembly.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. Last year with the launch of the M2 iPad Pros, we also saw a few notable pro-level applications hit iPadOS, one of those being DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is an all-in-one video editing application that includes color grading, color correction, visual effects, and audio post-production. It is available for macOS, Windows, Linux, and now iPadOS. To dive into this brand new iPad version of DaVinci Resolve is Shawn Carlson, who's a product specialist at Blackmagic Design. And as you'll hear, he really knows his stuff. You can download the app for free to follow along. You can download it right now from the App Store. And if you like what you hear today or experience in the app itself, there is a one-time upgrade fee to unlock all the features of DaVinci Resolve. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. Even $1 a month for early access with chapter markers over patreon.com/iPadPros goes a very long way in helping with the production of this show. So thank you if you are one of those incredible people supporting this podcast. Without further delay, here's my nearly 2-hour discussion with Shawn about all things DaVinci Resolve. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Shawn.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm
interesting.
Super excited to have you on. You're part of the team that works with DaVinci Resolve, creates DaVinci Resolve, and it's now out on iPad. This is a big day for iPad because, for those that don't know, this is a professional level video editing tool that's now on this brand new platform.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks again for having me here. This is an interesting experience for me. And as you mentioned, I'm part of that team. Though I can't take credit for this. I'm not part of product management and team development, but and they deserve all the congratulations on the release. But I'm excited to be here to discuss this launch with your listeners. It's in terms of my exposure to DaVinci Resolve. Obviously, I've been on DaVinci Resolve in the desktop environment, so this is a completely new interface for us, and yet another operating system to release it for.
Yeah, and what is your role within Blackmagic Design?
So I'm a product specialist, and that essentially means I have to be a specialist for every product we release across the hardware and the software teams. And clearly that is a nonstop, job, right? Trying to keep up with our development. And so we release so many things and so many new products all the time. We have got kind of a furious schedule, if you will. They're always moving. But in this case, I pretty much focus on Resolve. So DaVinci Resolve being the platform that I'm in daily on multiple OSs and dealing with customers who are doing the same.
And what's your background with video editing to kind of break this, test it and try to break it? Do you shoot a lot of video yourself and have kind of passion projects that you get to work on as part of your job?
Yeah, actually, Blackmagic has been very gracious with my time, of late when there have been a couple of interesting short films that have been allowed to kind of help out with taking on various editorial roles, like, an assistant editor, a remote on-set editor, the, editor of name, the conform artist, doing basically a lot of things just because, I have operational experience in this. And in the past, I think, God, if I go all the way back, I probably started editing, before I started editing, I started animating and creating editing motion graphics bumpers for like TV syndicated film packages. And it kind of grew from there to, cutting the teasers for those films, and then into full trailer work for new films and promo spots, sizzles, featurettes. I did some on-air news segments and some BTS cuts, the fully formatted 21 and a half minutes exactly that go on the DVD extras, things like that.
Yeah.
Across all different NLEs and VFX packages of the day. Historically, that included things like Adobe Premiere, things like, Apple's Final Cut Pro. We used Shake. There were a number of things: Shake, Smoke, Combustion, Motion. So, I mean, I look back longingly at that, at those formative years and think, what could I have done if I had DaVinci Resolve back then? Because, it was really, the tool set was designed to be, a hardware-based, facility-driven, environment for color and finishing.
Right.
And when it came to the desktop platform, it kind of, took over. Right. I mean, it's the only platform essentially that is its own ecosystem. The other, I would say, competitors in the field, right, from the big names that I've already dropped.
Yeah.
They have many tools, and they're adding more and more tools as they upgrade their versions. But if you look at the way DaVinci Resolve is organized in these pages, it's essentially laying out the entirety of the workflow. And in every page, you can simply present the tools that are, the tools that you would need in that discipline.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. With Final Cut, you have motion and other tools it bounces you out to do different, verticals of that work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and since we're kind of, we're a manufacturer of hardware and software solutions for film and television, post-production, production. And we kind of started by delivering a Decklink PCI video card, right? A video capture card. And that was the creation of this hardware journey. But in addition to that, we make now many other PCI Decklink capture cards, right, all the way up to the 8K Pro Decklink card. We also offer Ultra Studio version, which is the Thunderbolt or USB-C connected capture devices. We make broadcast studio and cinema cameras. We have ATEM, HD, 4K, and even 8K video switchers, signal routing, adapters. But what we're talking about today is essentially that we've brought this flagship editing, color grading, audio mixing, visual effects mastering software, DaVinci Resolve, to the iOS platform here, and I've been running it on this iPad very nicely.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The business model Blackmagic Design, you do so much in hardware that this is great software. It's not a subscription. It's affordable. It's I think $100 an iPad and probably a little bit more on desktop for the full unlock. Is that right?
Yeah, you're right. The studio upgrade, essentially, I guess we should talk about those differences because there's a few. But essentially, like you said, the studio upgrade for the tools that extend their feature set beyond the free version are $95 on the iOS platform, and they are $295 on Mac, Windows, and Linux platforms.
Yeah, and as you said, there's a free download, which is and it's a very full-featured free download.
I mean, I don't want to rattle off too many of the features comparison, like a chart necessarily, but if you're looking for an overview, when you're comparing, say, the desktop version of the free installation versus the studio installation, you end up with, in a desktop environment, you have the ability to connect multiple graphics processing cards. And, going back to how DaVinci Resolve might have been in a facility, prior to Blackmagic's acquisition, and then later, upgrade to Resolve, which was, I want to say about 10 or 11 years ago at this point now. So it hasn't been that long, since they took over and the platform has just grown by leaps and bounds. So comparing the free version, which is now Ultra HD, right, 4K, broadcast 4K capable, right, 3840. It'll do that at 60 frames per second in the free version. And we've also included a number of Fairlight effects for audio and Resolve effects for video. And of the 100 plus Resolve effects, as an example, more than half of those are going to be available to the free version without the studio upgrade. And we really only limit it to, the studio version doesn't have the limit in terms of file size, edit size. You can deliver to 4K DCI. So that would indicate you're a professional attempting to deliver to a standard like DCI. But a lot of people that might be delivering to the streamers could even be able to deliver in UHD.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like we're saying this is a free version and you won't be able to do any work on it. It's a fully featured free version, and it's essentially just a permanently free version. So
right.
we even offer the same. Once you've made the expenditure and you've upgraded to DaVinci Resolve Studio, the studio license is essentially your perpetual license. So we're not going to charge you again next month. We're not going to charge you again next year.
Right. Yeah. Now, where did it come about to decide, let's bring this to iPad? Was Apple Silicon on Mac a big part of it? You're already, transitioning those apps to work with that architecture?
I can't really speak to the motivation. As I did mention, I'm outside of the product management team, where probably many of those discussions were going on between product manager and and Grant, who does direct an awful lot of the of these decisions. So without really knowing, I wouldn't want to speculate on this, but it's definitely exciting, to be able to bring these level of professional tools to an entirely new platform. As I mentioned earlier, DaVinci Resolve is already across Mac, Windows, and Linux, and now we're also on iOS. And working on this particular model iPad that I've been testing out, I've been very happy with its performance.
Yeah, no, it runs phenomenal. I'm on the M1 iPad Pro, and I'm sure it's even better on the M2. Something that I'm curious about is, this is version 1, and it's missing things like the Fusion tab and the Edit tab. Are future tabs from the Mac version, long term? Is it kind of in Blackmagic's idea to eventually bring some of those things over? And maybe there is, it's $300 on Mac. Maybe as you add, more of these tabs, there's an in-app purchase to unlock some of those additional missing tabs.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, in this case, this is kind of like future discussion, which we pretty much don't engage in. So I don't really know that there's anything I can reveal if that was a roadmap necessarily.
Sure.
But I mean, if you look at our development, I think you'll find that historically across the DaVinci Resolve app is a very good example. But certainly even in cases where we've sold a customer a piece of hardware, that hardware is usually sold with the software at the same time, right? The firmware is something that you'll get as a driver or a download. And what you'll find is even with older hardware, Blackmagic is still releasing newer firmware that adds features to things you've already purchased. So, I would lean towards the legendarily,
yes,
as it seems, we've been adding features, and we, it feels like sometimes we are trying to avoid to charge customers for it. So I would guess that, the features in this initial version are limited, right? We are using the cut and the color pages. It's quite possible that this is just, this is just on the roadmap in terms of, when those things might be available, if those become available. And, the development team has done an excellent job, actually, of converting some things that would be, difficult contextual menus or buried a little bit in a menuing system to have revealed them and organized them in the interface icons and allowed for things like long press to engage some of those. So.
Yeah. No, it's translated very nicely to iPad. I'm rather enjoying it. That the edits tab was the one. I have a friend that uses DaVinci Resolve day in day out. That was the one thing he was most disheartened. That one day he hopes to see that make its way back over to iPad.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been an editor for quite a while, and the edit tab is definitely my comfort zone. Right? It's a 2-up viewer of source and record with a linear timeline below. You walk into that from any NLE experience, and you can just sit down and start working. You might need to find out where exactly that tool is, but you already know what the interface looks like. It's recognizable. So I agree. That's definitely something that that I've heard people are interested in. So I'll definitely pass that along as well. I think if you look at what the cut page brings in terms of its flexibility and speed, that might just be a perfect pairing for the iPad. I know that when the cut page was added into DaVinci Resolve 16, and it included the release of a hardware keyboard at the same time. So simultaneously, we had this editor, full Resolve editor keyboard, and the shuttle dial actually works to control those attributes in the cut page. So when we released later the DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor, right, the smaller subset of that full editor keyboard, it also included the jog shuttle dial and the multicam controls and the direct trim controls on the left. Well, I've got the Speed Editor, and because it's Bluetooth, I've got it connected to my iPad. So I found that the Speed Editor combined with the cut page makes really short work of quick assembly.
So, yeah, I did notice, and later in my questions I had about, you guys do sell these hardware keyboards for editing. Those pretty much all work across the board within this app?
Well, in this case, there's one, the DaVinci Resolve editor keyboard, which is the full-length, full-size, based on a gaming keyboard with the cherry browns and all of those things that you're expecting, right? A high-end mechanical keyboard, and then in addition to that, had the specific to DaVinci Resolve, trimming and jog shuttle dial. Well, that model, being USB-C bus powered, isn't going to be able to draw enough power at that point if we were to connect USB-C to USB-C. So I don't believe, and then it would also, I'm speculating at this point, but it just in terms of the things that I know about what USB devices would need, I don't know that we would get access to that.
Okay, because I know, I was curious, if you hook it up to like a Thunderbolt dock, that would
right. And I did that actually. I have the little Apple, AV adapter as a start, and then I also got one, from another company, right? I got the Anchor. That has a couple of different options on it. And I found that they work really well. But I've only added the screen, the Samsung T5, and then a second power. I have another port available, and the one thing that I haven't been able to test yet is to get an Ethernet port from there so that I can hardwire and add myself to the to my protected network. Essentially, the iPad in my office is on my Wi-Fi, and my Wi-Fi is never connected to my wired Ethernet network. I don't bridge the two.
My Thunderbolt dock has a little Ethernet port on it directly, and it is wired in right now.
So exactly. Nice, if I had that dock, then perhaps I would already have the opportunity to do this.
But
I find that because the speed editor. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but for all the Bluetooth keyboards you guys sell, because of the Bluetooth protocol, that stuff will just work, and it understands for the special stuff within DaVinci how to translate that.
Yeah, actually, as soon as you've paired this speed editor with your iPad, DaVinci Resolve just sees it. And it's kind of a similar way that you might pair it if you were on the desktop as well. Although in the desktop, you'll see this in what's called the DaVinci Resolve control panels. So there's an actual app that you'll run that interacts with and updates firmware and things. But
Yeah. So, I'd imagine this app works great with Blackmagic cameras for RAW footage. Other companies, do you guys take the time to work with Sony RAW and other formats?
yeah, and that's the thing. We actually, DaVinci Resolve supports all of those normal, third-party camera formats in the desktop versions. And there's a limitation right now on the iPad version where you mentioned that we do definitely work with our own cameras, and our camera format is the Blackmagic RAW format, which is, a wrapped movie-like file. And, DaVinci Resolve on the iPad can see and, scrub and play with that media. No, I didn't have any 4.6K media to play around with. All the other media that I've been using on the iPad so far has been, UHD to 4.6, but those have been either proxies or they just created transcodes, which is really the workflow that I would probably, assume a lot of people are going to be using on the iPad. Now, I did throw the Blackmagic RAW into a timeline, the 12K Blackmagic RAW into a timeline, and scrub it just to see that I could do it. I certainly didn't try to do any real processing on it, like no noise reduction or anything, because that would be probably the most processor intensive thing I could try.
Right.
On that particular clip. But yeah, I was impressed. I'm patting myself on the back, I guess, by saying I'm impressed with their own software. But
right.
To be honest, I have to step aside and be somewhat objective, about this as a video professional, as well as, a Blackmagic employee. So I was impressed as a video professional.
Yeah. That
my 12K Blackmagic RAW would actually import and, was working just fine. I mean, I wasn't going to try playing it because, wow.
Yeah.
It's a huge frame, but
yes,
I could play that on my laptop all day long. I have the MacBook Pro with the what do I have? I have the M1 Max, and so it's like maybe a year old at this point.
Right.
And the M1 Max tosses that 12K around with no issues.
Yeah,
really, which blows my mind.
So back in the day, I heard things like Final Cut. You could like network in a bunch of computers to help with the rendering and stuff. Is this still a thing? And like, could you create like an iPad network of a bunch of people running DaVinci Resolve to help out? And
the interesting thing about that is that because DaVinci Resolve is presently a fully collaborative workflow, available on the other three platforms, that with the addition of the cloud project libraries that we released in version 18 at NAB last year, the shared cloud project library allows even, these remote connected iOS devices to have access to things like the, shared project files.
Yeah.
And in the shared project file area, you can enable what's called multi-user simultaneous collaboration. And in multi-user collaboration, we're working with bin locks and timeline locks and first in, first out locks on the media. There's badging, badges that show up next to the bins to indicate who's involved in the bin, who's locking the bin. They can be explicitly locked. You have a collaboration chat area to chat among the members that are actually active in the project at the same time. And there's a project members panel so that you can see who's active in the project at the same time. In addition to being able to hit the home button and jump between projects that you might be working on. This is all a completely new world of collaboration now to add on iPad versions, to your collaborative workflow. I could see that, while this app it probably hits a number of different demographics, because not only is it for the single person with an iPad not only is it the single person with an iPad, who might want to capture something immediately in the field, cut it together, add effects, add music, add titles, and then export directly from it. as well as perhaps maybe, a cinematographer who's on set doing some location scouting, wants to look at some lighting, right? They might take a little string out reel of lighting. If you have an assistant editor, who's acting as the metadata and the import and the organizational side of things, right? All of these can work in tandem with an ongoing production. And, that's kind of it sounds corny. That's a brave new world. I'm just going to say it now.
So for those new to DaVinci Resolve, maybe they've worked in Final Cut Pro before or Adobe Premiere. DaVinci Resolve kind of brings a bunch of tool sets into one app. But I'm curious about the actual editing process. If someone's starting, or maybe they've never even edited video in any app before in their life. What's kind of the general points and tips about getting around just the editing process in Resolve?
Well, okay. I mean, I think that if you look at how we compare across, to other NLEs in terms of familiarity, I find that, as a former user of many other NLEs, I was able to sit in front of DaVinci Resolve and immediately begin working. Now, if you've never had any experience with this, but perhaps you've done some basic editing in your phone or on your iPad in the past, with things that you've taken, you at least understand the concept, right? And the concept is, I may have shot this one long scene, and then I'm going to trim it just to the select that I need. So again, the trim tools are there. They're very simple. You can engage the trim function, which turns the viewer into the trim tool, gives you, easy ruler options to trim a frame here and there. There's shortcut buttons that trim frames. And of course, if you've got the speed editor, you also have a trim in, trim out button under your left hand. That works at the same time with the scroll wheel. So if you've engaged your trim out and you just scroll forward until, until it needs to, right? Or scroll back until you're cutting the select, it's a very natural kind of an editing interface when you get around to it. I think, especially when you get the opportunity to use, a speed editor with it and the shuttle dial. But clearly, the interface tools, the transport controls, they're all going to be there on the iPad itself. You can use your finger to do this as long as you don't have giant fat fingers like mine that don't really hit the point that I need. In which case, I bought the Apple Pencil too, so I could also have that really granular ability to tap the point that I'm looking for.
Yeah. But when you import media into a project, how does does it treat it as it's importing that file into this project that's stored there? It's got the full original file that you can work with on all the other platforms, or, how does that all work?
Yeah. So, DaVinci Resolve in general is actually kind of different in this regard. And that can create some confusion. So it's a good question to ask, especially for someone new to DaVinci Resolve. And on the iPad, it works the same. The imported media, and I use the import in air quotes that you can't see now, the imported media actually doesn't copy media to the location of the iPad. It simply references the location. So it's the same way that it would work on the desktop version. Imported media is simply linked to its location. It's not moved. This is really for file safety, right? If we start moving media around, it might be linked or needed in another project that they don't have access to. Thinking in terms of like a collaborative, in-facility workflow, you would almost never want to move your media. So Resolve really just tries to take that to the next level and insists no media gets moved. We simply link to it. This also allows us a very simple relink option. And you'll notice in the iPad, in the top left-hand corner of the interface, if you have what looks like a link icon and it's red, that indicates you need to click it and relink your media. It'll pop up with a dialog box and it'll tell you how many clips are missing, where their former pass was, and you click the button, try to relink to it. So it's actually very, very, perfectly tailored, I think, for something where, solid state storage is going to be really expensive.
Yes.
Right. So upgrading the iPad to have enough storage to be able to work with is just going to be cost prohibitive in many cases. So I found that the things that I've been able to do as far as where we import, I imported a couple of clips that I shared as an iCloud album. So I was in my Dropbox app, moved them over. I was looking at the Dropbox app from my iPad, and I'm creating selects, and then I used the share function, shared an iCloud library, just so that I'd have access to it from my iCloud account across all of my different devices, which worked really well. So my laptop opens up, I've got an iCloud share, and I can see those clips that I have from the Guitar Maker. And then, I did the same in the iPad as well, and imported those clips that I shared. They work really nicely, just as easily as any other clip that I imported. But the other clips that I was primarily working with in my test, I used an external USB-C SSD like the Samsung T5.
Yeah.
And because I have that dock, I can just connect both. I can connect power and I can connect the drives, and so that's really how I've been testing it lately.
Okay. If you have like a Synology on your network, can you link? I mean, I think that shows up in the Synology Drive app, which is in the Files app, so it can see that through that. Is that a workflow, and would it create proxy videos so editing would still remain fast working on a network attached storage? Or
yeah, so if you're playing media from the network, then clearly we have the streaming capabilities, your download speed, which would be your connection to your network. And if in the case of using, say, the dock idea for the iPad, and if it comes with a hardware Ethernet port, that would obviously be better, more reliable than trying to do the same over Wi-Fi, unless you have a really fast Wi-Fi router that doesn't pick up much. It seems that wired Ethernet is just more stable for that. So I would say that your workflow suggestion about the NAS, right? You have, in your case, you have the Synology.
Yep.
I actually own two Synologies. Yes, great. Okay. So following up on the Synology question, because you had asked about connecting the NAS, and I haven't had a chance to do that because I didn't have the correct dock at this point to test that workflow. But I was able to see how connecting some of the other Pro apps to the iPad, like I've got my Skype and my Slack on there, all of my my email works flawlessly, but that also included things like my sharing apps. So I have a Hightail account and I have a Dropbox account, and that just gives me access to all the media. And most of the time, since the Dropbox account, as we released in version 18, the Proxy Generator app has an auto routine which will update proxies directly to a shared Dropbox account.
Oh, nice.
So I found that's kind of the way that I would probably be doing this. I did create one share, mounted to it through my iPad, and then I just made some selects. When I had selects, that's when I sent them to the iCloud, because I needed to test the ability to do the iCloud share as well for media acquisition.
Yeah, I was wondering, just how smart it is. I've got this external hard drive, I plug into the iPad, let me plug that drive into the Mac. Does it now recognize it's the same hard drive on different OSs and all that? It seems that it does pretty well.
Yeah, it does. My little Samsung T5, I think I keep that. I have multiple little T5s, and I think the one that I brought, I'll have to verify what format I used. And I want to say by default I used to use those as expat, because I would format them in the camera. So the Pocket Cinema camera 4Ks that I have for my video setup, which it runs through a little ATEM switcher, I actually use the T5s as their recording media.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll just format directly in the back of the camera. When you're in the LCD and you add storage, you'll see it'll show up. It'll say card 1, card 2, and you click the little card 1 button. It's a touch screen interface. It's Blackmagic OS, actually. The one that's on the phone, and the one that's on the camera, rather. So yeah, it's that's basically my workflow to date.
Yeah.
Is Samsung T5, and then a handful of little things that have been shared. But most of my acquisition is done directly through the, adding a camera card, camera media, and I look at it like a DIT or like an onset, camera media acquisition rule, right?
Mhm.
Which is camera cards come in, you make your first copy off to your RAID,
Yep.
right? You need to make sure it's safe.
Yes.
And then you go ahead and make all of your other copies as per, right, the 321 booklet now that Netflix has released about doing all those things. So yeah, I would say that my workflow tends to drop camera media and then generate proxies kind of every time a new camera card shows up. So I would think you could probably take that role with the iPad, where you simply acquire camera media, start making your transfers to all of your devices, especially if in the case of, sending things to Dropbox might be necessary.
Yeah.
Right. You can obviously connect it.
And if you're creating proxy footage, are you able to go offline away from the original source media? And then once you're back at the source media, that's when you do your big export with the full resolution?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. And if you look at the way that that the media pool is represented in the iPad, what you're going to see is that when you long press on media, you can you'll get the context menu, the same menu you get in the right click on the desktop OS. And in the context menu, you'll see things like relink to proxy or link to full resolution media. The assumption there is that, you're obviously working with this lower resolution media to start with. And then if this was the full resolution media that you're working with, you might want to link it to a proxy file, and then you could switch to using the proxies. Now, if you look at the playback menu in the desktop OS, you'll find that it has a quick selection to switch between working with proxies and preferring camera originals. And in that workflow, with multiple OSs involved, it's quite likely your workflow would be creating proxies, linking to proxies, and then when your iPad connects and relinks to its own copy, it's relinking to its own copy of the proxies anyway, because you probably didn't want to send the full resolution camera media over for an iPad to work on.
Right. Yeah.
And because, like I said in the past, when we were talking earlier about formats, this supports the H.264, H.265, ProRes, and it supports our own Blackmagic RAW, but it does not support the frame-based RAW media.
Okay.
That's captured, say, in like a .ARI or an R3D, because they're frame stacks. They're not recognized the same way.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Something I noticed, if I click on timeline 1, it gives me a drop down. It kind of makes me feel like I can add multiple timelines and kind of swap between them. Is that a thing?
You absolutely can do that, actually. And so if you press and hold again, it's the long press, and inside the media pool, when you do that, what you'll see is that you have a, create new timeline option. Well, in addition to the create new timeline option, there's also a create new timeline from selected clips. You had asked, a little bit about maybe doing a long play, right? If you can create more than one timeline, then clearly you could create more than one timeline that you cut together into one long play timeline.
Yeah.
So the workflow there would be to create your individual timelines, then simply drag select across them in the media pool, press and hold until you get the contextual menu and say, use these selected clips to make a new timeline. You'll now see whatever that timeline dialog box pops up in between. You can name that long play. You'll see all of them cut in, which essentially just creates a nest, right? And it's something that we have access to in the desktop version as well. A timeline can be a source, so you can cut from one timeline to another, which then allows you the opportunity to choose to decompose your edit at the same time, which if you just want to bring the clips over the way they were, or if you just want to leave them as compound clips, essentially just, nested together until you get what you need. This will allow you the same option.
Okay.
You can do that the same way. In fact, that was the first thing that I did, was try to find a way to create another compound clip. That we didn't have directly from inside the edit interface. So,
and is there a way to name the timelines, or are they just numbered?
Yeah, actually, I think if you hold, let me click on mine, because I have a bin here. If you click, you can actually click on it and choose to rename it. The other thing is when it's created, in the long press, right, on the media pool, when it's created, if you say create new timeline, the dialog box that pops up does give you an option right there for creating a timeline name.
Okay.
In fact, it also allows you to deselect something called use project settings, which means that every timeline you create can have completely independent settings of the project. So you may have a project.
Right. This is kind of like in Avatar 2, how some scenes will have the high frame rate version. And then, yeah, right? Yeah.
Exactly. You might have a need, right?
Yes.
Like to deliver for James Cameron.
Yeah.
And congratulations if you do. So,
yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, and in that case, then you can just create a new timeline and say, well, this timeline is going to be 5994 instead of 24 or 2398.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can also create different output resolutions. You can choose, like if I deselect the use project settings, I also have the ability to change my timeline output. So there's a little bit of an image scaling process that happens in terms of the source media to the timeline resolution to the output resolution.
Mm-hmm.
All of that processing is done in 32-bit float, like we've been doing, legendarily, which essentially just means it's enough math at enough resolution that we can transform back and forth without losing anything. Right?
Yeah.
So this allows us to do some things like maybe we're working with 2K media and our format is an HD timeline, but our output needs to be 3840. You could make that work and simply using the mismatch resolution option to scale entire image to fit. Or if you're choosing a greater resolution, you could use our superscale option. Superscale, again, being the DaVinci Neural Engine, enhanced features.
Yeah.
And there are many of those. Those are some of the ones that we mentioned earlier that would be included in the studio version.
This crossed my mind. 3D editing, is this a thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you needed to work with stereoscopic, that is a feature of the studio version in the desktop OS. Now,
Okay.
I have not had the opportunity to look into
like what happens when you open
tools.
that project up on the iPad. Like, what does it do with it? Yeah, that's
what
the
does
question,
it do with the stereo left eye, right eye? Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to have to test and get back to you on, because I don't have an example of stereo left eye, right eye. But the way that works in the desktop version, and I would attempt to try if you do have access to some stereo media.
It's been I back like a decade ago, I had the GoPro set up with the 3D link, and that was so much fun to play with. So it's been about a decade since I played around with 3D editing. It was a fun time.
It's fun, yeah. I mean, you'll find that obviously it's really it's a high-end feature request.
Yes,
for a lot of things.
It's not normal.
It's everywhere. So yeah, it's not something that very many people do. I was talking to a group that pretty much focuses on this right now. It's one of the largest VFX companies. It's called DNEG.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just talking to the group that does their stereo 3D work.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of talking about, Resolve features and things like that. But,
yeah.
So essentially you pair your left eye and right eye in separate bins in the media pool.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just have left content, right content. And I will have to try that to see, just what we can do, because
I'm curious.
That's a studio feature.
Yeah. And then something I noticed as well is I kept on adding tracks, and I hit 60 before I tried to add any more. Is there a limit? Can you add unlimited tracks in the iPad version?
I don't know that there's a physical limit on tracks, because we did port the desktop OS version, and there's no limit to the number of tracks there. It's effectively unlimited. Now, in the desktop version, you're still fighting screen space. I would imagine that's probably the limiting factor in the iPad as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was doing a good job condensing things down. That's how it works.
Yeah. And mine is the 12.9-inch M2 iPad Pros. This one has the 8 gigs of RAM.
Yep.
I would imagine if you got the upgraded model that included the 1 terabyte or the 2 terabyte, that your RAM increases, and then that would probably give you greater access to those.
Yeah, I have the 1 terabyte one, because I also knew you get more RAM with that. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So with the Blackmagic Cloud, there's a huge benefit if you're working on Mac and having the same project there. Does it kind of act as a little bit of a backup as well if you're iPad only? And like, are there benefits if you're just an iPad user of having cloud and using that?
You know, I mentioned the benefits of using the Blackmagic Cloud earlier. In fact, I mentioned how that's pretty much how I envision the collaboration working.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary, obviously. I mean, if you work from the iPad and you want to be a solo artist, you can work in the project manager. You'll see that there's 3 different ways that the project manager shows shared projects, and one would be the local. The local installation is just local to this individual device. Then the network tab actually allows you to be connected to others that you might be inside a protected facility, a single facility, local area network. And then the cloud tab actually engages the Blackmagic Design hosted web service, which is to the Blackmagic Cloud shared project library interface. Well, the benefit of the cloud is obvious because you can access it from wherever you happen to be. And then those collaborators are wherever they happen to be around the globe. So you have true global collaboration by accessing the cloud shared library. The issue, I will say, there's not an issue. It's not an issue, I would say. What would I say? What would I really say? What I'm really just trying to say is that the cloud service itself is a hosted service, and only the host is going to pay for that. It's a $5 US a month service for every cloud library you have standing up. You can pause them, so you can come back if work took 6 weeks, but then it's down for 3 weeks. You can pause it, come back, re-enable it again. It's basically just it's $5 a month, and like other things, we really are trying not to charge for things that we offer. Right?
Yes.
So it's a very nominal fee. So $5 a month, just so that we can allow you to have access to sharing these cloud projects with your global collaborators, and none of the collaborators have to pay.
Okay.
So you just have to get a Blackmagic ID, it's actually a Blackmagic Cloud ID. So if you go to our website and you look at the navigation bar to the right, there's a little cloud icon next to the US or your country's icon. Right. And so when you click the cloud icon, that actually opens up the cloud service page. It'll allow you to, if you haven't already logged in, to create a Blackmagic Cloud ID. Those are free.
Yeah.
Once you've created the cloud ID, the host, who also has a cloud ID and is logged into their same interface through that cloud button, you'll see the project server and the settings options enabled when you've done that. So the host then logs into their project server, selects the projects that they want to add to that server, and then those projects simply become available. In fact, the server will just show up to every collaborator who's been invited.
Yeah.
So when you click the cloud tab and you log into your Resolve to your Blackmagic Cloud ID, then you'll just see them. It'll just indicate every shared library you have access to.
Okay. And so the original resolution video, of course, is not uploaded along. It's linked, as we said before. Is proxy footage uploaded along with into the cloud account for remote editing, or do you need or does proxy footage need to be generated on each individual computer? Is that the approach?
It can be shared proxy footage, but it's actually not being shared over the cloud library. That's just for the projects themselves. So projects and metadata is being shared in the library. And then the other methods of sharing the media itself would be, how you would choose to get media to your collaborators. And in the case of, say, a camera media DIT station that's taking original camera media and making their transfers, that's where you would engage the Blackmagic Proxy Generator app. So as camera cards come in, you have a watch folder that says, great, as my media gets transferred to my SAN, then when you're polling that directory, please automatically generate proxies in this format. When it does that, you can click the extract button to create just a folder of those proxies, because this process is normally done for a Resolve that's on that system.
Yeah.
So once you've extracted the proxies, you can send that folder of proxies everywhere. You can zip it up. You could, email it if it's tiny, or you can just go through the Dropbox options, which are also included So if you have a Dropbox account, you can simply set up the auto routine with that. Same goes for the Google Drive. There are options to do syncing to share folders on both of those platforms.
Gotcha. And then color coding clips is something I noticed is something pretty intriguing. How have you seen people use this? And can you rename colors? Can green be like forest? And like, can you do stuff like that?
Yeah, I know. Actually, you can't rename the color labels themselves, but what you can do, and I'll go into how the colors really get used, but this is really a metadata question.
Yeah.
Since Resolve is really key with metadata, we track a ton of metadata on these clips. That's, the ability to have labels and keywords and things like that would all be added in the metadata section for sure. The colors themselves, I find that the way that I use the color coding, the way that I've used it in the past and most recently, actually, on the short films that I was talking about, I was in Conform on one of them, and VFX returns were coming back from the vendor. So as VFX returns would come back and I would drop them into my bin, I would color code every one of those from my bin. And so now all VFX, were chocolate.
Yeah.
Right. So that everywhere I could simply look across my timeline and find out where all of my chocolate were. Just visually, you could quickly see that.
Right.
But additionally, in the edit page is a function called the edit index window. When you open the edit index window, you can actually sort by the marker color, a lot of metadata attributes. So in this case, I would sort by clip color and say, just show me all of my VFX returns. It essentially creates a live EDL where you just navigate in between your. So I found it incredibly useful for that. But I've also used it for narrative, where if I have like two people on camera in a dialogue scene, the standard 3 angles, right? We have the 2 shot, we have one over the shoulder, and we have one over the shoulder opposite.
Yeah.
And in those environments, one, you probably are being asked by all of the stakeholders and the producers, and probably even sometimes some of the actors, right, to make sure that they're on camera enough, or to make sure that their good dialogue lines are there. And so when you look at a narrative scene like that, I found that what I'll do is in the metadata tagging, I will sort by actor. And in Resolve, you can actually do this with the people keywords. So you can look across an entire bin of content and then find out all the people that are in it. It'll identify it for you because the neural engine is recognizing that there are people in it. So the AI recognizes that person. You can then give that person a label. And as you label that person, you'll see a bin is created for you automatically. So having access to a bin of people, what I'll do at that point is I'll color code the people in terms of the clip colors.
Yeah.
Then when I'm looking at a scene I've cut, it's, a minute long or 4 minutes long, it doesn't matter. As I zoom all the way out to the chiclet mode of, 150 different edits in this thing, what you can see in that color way is now the relative weight of, whose scene is this, right? Narratively, right? Is it the lead actor A, lead actor B, right? And also that's a great way to at least be able to answer those questions that you're going to have in the editorial review. Like, hey, do you think you featured this person enough? And I'll be, well, actually, here, let's show you this picture.
Yeah. No, that's really neat. And creating multi-cam footage, what's that process like? And that visual of seeing the colors would also translate into that as well?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. If you wanted to use colors to represent angles, that might even be another way that I haven't tried. So I like that idea too.
Yeah.
I would say that multicam on here is actually very simple. One of the reasons for that is that, I talked about the speed editor, but since I got the little video, you can see, right?
Yeah.
So these are direct multicam controls right here. This camera is 1 through 9, right? So camera 1 through 9, and then there's also a function, if I look to where that is, there's live overwrite, video only, and audio only buttons that are just on these 3 sides. Right?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So what you do in Resolve, and again, you can do this on the iPad. I was very happy to find out that I could add a sync relationship to this. But from the media pool, you import your media, so say your angles, right? And then you cut in the cut page, you simply cut in your primary angle,
Okay.
right? And whatever that is. So in the mold of scene we were talking about with the 3 cameras, imagine they were shooting multicam, which they never do, right?
Yes.
And they had the angles all properly organized. Okay. So in that workflow, we could say, great, those.
Because most of the time, do they shoot the scene multiple times so they can have clear line of? Yeah, they don't have cameras behind, obviously.
So
they're
there's
not
no
visible.
camera, because otherwise, imagine if you're shooting over the shoulder, you're essentially shooting from right behind this shoulder.
Yeah, there'd be no way to hide the camera.
To see you. Yeah, and then shooting right behind your camera to see me is, we're going to see the cameras the whole time. So
yes.
But, okay, so you import your media, you then cut that main angle in. In the media pool, what you can do is drag select across your angles and then click the sync button. The sync button will now let you have a sync map interface where you get to choose. Do you want to sync from time code? Do you want to sync by waveform? Do you want to sync by marker you might have already defined, or by in and outs, right? Once you've done that, you click the sync button, you save, it closes. Now, if you look up in the left corner, the top left corner of the iPad in the media pool area, there's a button above it next to media, says sync. That's actually the sync in representation. So what you'll see is in that timeline you've just created, where you just appended one primary angle, as you scrub over that angle, your sync bin will live scrub over the other angles that are also in sync with it.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes editing very simple. You press the, say you've got the master audio on the primary angle. So you click the video only button, you simply add a cutaway. You're like, video only, camera 2, cutaway. And you can cut away with either, in-out buttons. You can drag scroll, or you can use the jog shuttle wheel. It's very fluid, actually. So it's a really fun multicam, cutaway workflow to use that.
The first time I discovered multicam and audio syncing, it was like, oh, this is great. It's just such a yeah. If you have the footage and the source material, it's fun to work that way. You're like live editing.
Yeah, and especially now that we also make the ATEMs, and in the last couple of years, having released the little minis, one of the models that we released is called the ATEM Mini ISO or ISO, right? And so that actually will trigger record all the cameras that are connected to it, and it records internally to the switcher. It records every camera ISO angle as an H.264. So you always get a proxy of everything. Individually, because it's triggered the cameras to record, they're all now recording internally on RAW. So you have proxies, you have RAW at 4K or 6K or whatever you've captured. But then the ISO, the ATEM switcher actually generates a DaVinci Resolve project for you.
Yeah.
You can launch that project and it'll have your cutaways. So you can go conform to 4K later if you want.
Yeah. And so something I really appreciate about using the app on the iPad was with the Trackpad, if you hover over a video clip with the Trackpad, it'll kind of scrub through that. Are there other ways that using a Trackpad is kind of advantageous versus just using your finger?
Yeah. I've not tried the Trackpad because I ended up getting I got the Magic Folio rather than the other Apple version that had the Trackpad. So mine just has the keyboard. And but because I also got the pencil, you can do the same thing with the pencil. So if you hover over with the pencil over anything. So in the example, if we go to the color page and you go to the LUT view, and you're looking at your viewer screen, if you hover over the LUTs, you'll actually be able to scrub across to see what your LUT would look like before you applied it.
Oh, very cool. Yeah.
Right? And the same function is in the media pool when you're in the cut page. You can hover over and mark selections. It's very fluid, actually. That part works very nicely. So I'd imagine if you had, say, a trackpad version or even the Magic Trackpad, option, if that was working with it, then that would be pretty nice too.
Yeah.
But I touch the screen so often. I'm trying to touch the screen on my laptop all the time too.
Yes.
So.
And you mentioned tapping and holding as a way to get into different parts of the user interface. Are there other little gestures or things that are less discoverable worth pointing out?
Yeah, I've been discovering them as we go. It's been the long tress has really been the key. I think I found that the way that the interface has organized some of the tools that I'm expecting to be under menus, and having removed the menuing essentially in favor of, of icons. I find the pencil helps me a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Because then I don't fat finger something, I'll be able to tap directly on it. And in terms of, say, the viewer in the cut page or the viewer in the color page, if you're looking at that, at the viewer itself in the cut page, by example, there's that dot in the center with the two outward pointing arrows, right? Arrows to go to either side out. And that's essentially just a scroll, right? All this great scroll that I have available in my speed editor, you have that on the interface. I find it's incredibly easy to do that with the pencil, because you can just tap it and then just, go back and forth with it. So that and the Bezier handles. Like if I'm in the color page and I'm creating a secondary from a power window selection, the ability to use the polygon tool and then just adjust Bezier handles with my pencil, I find very, very simple with this tool.
Yeah. And as far as keyboard shortcuts, is it the exact same? Do you know the shortcuts on the Mac version? Are those keyboard shortcuts there on the iPad?
I saw somebody who would so I think a better word, they were trying to hack in, see more of the tools, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, when you open the keyboard shortcut menu, you'll see that there's a lot of things that you can control for, but there's also ways that you can add control. So if the keyboard shortcut doesn't exist already, you just add a second version. Maybe it's this already, but I'm so familiar with this version. Let me just add this to my keyboard shortcut so that it works that way. And I would imagine that we're probably going to get to the point where, we'll be allowing, more of the keyboard shortcut interactions. Right now, the only one that I really use all the time is Shift Z or Z, right? If I was in another page on the desktop version, Shift Z is going to take my timeline and it's going to fit it into my view, right?
Yeah.
So the whole timeline, whatever zoom I'm in, that's essentially like a toggled zoom state.
Yeah.
Well, Z, when you're in the color page, just does the same thing for the viewer.
Okay.
And since in the viewer of the color page, you can actually zoom in and get close to your detail, just hit the Z button, just resets it right away. So that's definitely the shortcut I use the most right now.
For adding those secondary keyboard shortcuts, that's a Mac only feature right now, is that right?
It does appear that that's not supported on the iPad yet. So I can't really speak to whether it's going to be. I did follow along with a YouTuber to see what they were able to see. Which is very interesting to see how they, they're like, well, if you just use these shortcuts, the shortcuts that you might remember from using the desktop version, that they do work. I think the Shift plus option works. So if I move, say, Shift, because this is Shift 3, right? Shift 3 and Shift 6. Yeah. So I think I didn't actually shift pages. Yeah. It didn't shift pages for me this time. Well, I had seen it do that. So it's possible that was when I was testing it out with the shortcuts that have been customized. But I noticed that if you look at the project settings, there's a lot of things that are available in the desktop version that are in preferences that deal with how we interact with the multiple GPUs, or whether you have video hardware connected, and that kind of stuff, routed audio. Those are obviously not going to be a necessary aspect of this software. So we aren't going to be able to configure multiple external GPUs likely. Maybe we will, but I can't imagine how.
No. So and Blackmagic sells audio consoles. Is that something that would work on iPad or no?
That's something I would have to test. I probably should have asked Mary, who has all of the consoles, if she's had a chance to do that yet.
Yeah.
Because she has one of everything right now, I think. The desktop editor, that would be, if they're not going to be Bluetooth capable, then we would have to find out. Yeah. Then we would have to find out if they could be recognized by the iPad as USB, right? So it's really just a matter of testing to see
if
how
it needs special drivers or anything like that.
Right, if it needs a special driver.
Yeah.
But then as long as those, were satisfied, I would imagine it would be functional. But
Yeah.
I've not been able to test that yet.
Okay.
I also need to test that on the micro panel. We have ways, and while everyone was kind of working from home, or at least while working from home was the primary way that everyone was doing things for the last 2+ years, that helped to, I don't know, it promoted new technologies, right? And so in addition to being able to be on-prem with a physical hardware in front of you, we were able to get people to remotely access Resolves and remotely access Resolve hardware from local hardware as well.
That's wild.
So that it was pretty wild to be able to do that. And we had a lot of, full-time, high-end working colorists who were doing their work from their house on, DaVinci Resolve $3,000 color mini panel.
Yeah.
When they have the $30,000 advanced panel back at the suite that's in the building that no one is allowed to go into.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
And then I noticed you can set a default transition. What's the quickest and easiest way to say I have two clips right next to each other to add that transition, that default transition in there?
So when the playhead is there at the cut between them, and in fact, even if it's close enough to the cut between them, it's essentially a smart edit. And there's a button in the interface. So if you're in the cut page and you're looking at the viewer tools, right? And depending on how your interface is open right now, mine has extra media pool open to the left, as opposed to the inspector open to the right, which does shift things. So looking beneath the viewer itself, and then looking at the tools, there are editing tools that are underneath the media pool. That includes like insert, which is a smart insert, append, which will always append at end. If you go to the end, there's two little icons there. One is a cut icon and one is a dissolve icon. And essentially, if you get to the split between these clips, you can simply add, and let's just go to that next clip. There we go. You can just add a dissolve by clicking the dissolve button. Now, if you press and hold on the dissolve button, which is that far right button closest to the viewer, then you'll also see that you have dissolve and smooth cut. Smooth cut is basically something you might use over 3 to 4 frames, where you have, maybe you're cutting this, imagine you're cutting me now as a talking head. Yeah. And, I went from this scene and then I had too many ums and ahs and whatever, and then I went to this scene. So it'll morph essentially between those two cuts. So smooth cut is great for that, that kind of EPK or behind the scenes kind of work. But anytime you have a transition that's in your sequence, if your playhead is over the transition and you want to default to remove that, you can just click the cut button. Essentially, it's now just a straight cut again.
Okay. And then green screens, blue screens, and masking, is that something a part of the iPad version?
Yeah. So I've tested a very limited amount of the keying options here, and I did it in the color page. But what you should look at is in the cut page, if you go to the effects tab, at the very top left-hand corner, it's media, sync, transitions, titles, effects. When you click on effects and you go to the video tab, if we're searching, we want to search for 3D keyer. Okay. And when you add, you just drag like anything else. You just drag to the clip you want, the 3D keyer. Then select the clip and look at the inspector tools. Because every time you have a clip selected in Resolve across all 4 platforms, its tools will be shown in the inspector. Then you'll see in the inspector that you have the video layer tools, you have the audio layer tools, and then next to that you have the effects. Okay. And in effects, that's actually where you'll control the 3D keyer. That includes the eyedropper, which you would imagine samples your background. It also offers some options, like you want to look in the YUV color space or the HSL color space, depending on how your footage is worked out. You might get better results from one or the other. If you look at the way that happens in the cut page, it's a vertically stacked timeline. Yeah. Right? So it's a vertical stack composite. So if you put the green screen at the top and you key the green out, you will see beneath it, right? Right. When you go to do the same thing in the color page, what you find is you're doing this function again with the 3D key tool. So if you go to the effects tab and then you search for 3D, you'll see 3D here. When you add that to the node, you also have to add an alpha output to the color page, which you can get from the 3-dot menu. So if you're looking at the node flow area, look above it to the 3-dot menu. It says add key mixer, add alpha output, and show thumbnail. So add alpha output will now add a blue dot underneath that yellowish green dot that's there in the nodes, which indicates your signal path.
Okay.
Right? That's just like a flow chart.
Yeah.
Signal path comes from the green dot to the node and back out. So you'll see that there's a blue node to connect. So once you've pulled the key, now in the color page, you've selected your green or your blue.
Yeah.
And you've got a key. You've created transparency by selecting and removing that color. You add the alpha output and you pipe the alpha output. And now the color page has created the transparency to the background as well.
I see. Okay. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned the inspector panel being something pretty important. Something I noticed in there is this dialogue level, which just sounds amazing. So it's doing some kind of AI to boost or lower dialogue without touching the other parts. Like if there's some background ambient, you leave like the street noise alone. If you want that a part of your shot, it's in there.
Essentially, yeah, it just provides, even more specific tools. And that is a newer tool that did get released relatively recently, even in the desktop version. Very effective. I recall one of the demos from our collaborator in the European office was just walking around with an iPhone and then walking around, flipped the camera up and just started some selfie vlogging.
Yeah.
And recorded it au naturel out walking about.
Yes.
And then sliding the dialogue processor, just the dialogue level just cleared up all of that, quieted all the background noise. It's really pretty impressive. And if you look at what's available, to the cut page, you have some audio level options, right? That's available on every clip.
Yeah. So
any clip, again, it will present its tools to the inspector. When you're in the inspector, you can now choose between the tool groups. And in this case, we're going to switch to the audio tool. You have a 4-band EQ that's available on every clip as well. And then, you look at what that means for like the full workflow when you get to the full desktop version, and you're looking at the Fairlight panels, and you're looking at all the other Fairlight processing. Each one of those tracks also has a 6-band EQ. So there's probably the dialogue processor, the vocal channel, and the dialogue leveler that I think are the things that you're probably going to be using the most in like the audio tools, because everybody needs to clean up, dirty dialogue and dirty audio, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then in the video inspector, I noticed there's this dynamic zoom. Is that like you mentioned earlier there's an AI for recognizing people. Are you able to set like a certain person to kind of follow around a bit?
That's actually like two different things. So I should probably talk a little about that. If I go to, say I'll go to this clip, and then we'll move to the dynamic zoom. Dynamic zoom. Dynamic zoom is available on the clip in the inspector. And while the ability to track a person would be a different function, this is more like if you wanted to create a natural movement, like a push in and zoom, on your content.
Yeah.
The dynamic zoom is doing this over the length of the clip. So its speed is entirely determined by the length of your clip.
I see.
And it's automatically going to transform between the green rectangles and the red rectangles that show up when you enable those, the interface tools.
Okay.
Which, if you're looking at the viewer, there's a fast review button on the lower left. The next button over actually engages the hidden tools that will drop right underneath the viewer itself. Some of those are going to be duplicated by what's in the inspector. But this is just how the cut page interface was created to kind of, present tools and then hide tools and get about your way. So when you're looking at those tools, you'll see the green and the red rectangles. And in their default position, they're, green is an inset, right? So essentially it would say that we start slightly punched in.
Yes.
And then red, we finally finish to the full wide shot, right?
Yeah.
You can swap that very simply in the inspector. Just click the swap button. And you can, of course, engage some of the, linear ease out or ease in and out options that are available under the pull down menu.
Yeah.
The other thing that you're talking about would be if you wanted to track, and let's see if we've got that here, because this is what I actually haven't tested yet. We have crop. There we go. Yeah. So we don't have that one. We don't have that one. Let's try this. Let's go to portrait mode. Yeah. Okay. So that's working perfectly. So above the viewer, what I was hoping to be able to answer there, and I guess we'll just have to touch on this later, and maybe I'll be able to get a better answer for you, and I'll send you a little recording or something. But I'll probably have to find out from the devs right now if this is on the block. Essentially, being able to reformat your horizontal, landscape mode footage in the portrait means you probably need to focus on another subject.
Yes.
You need that automatically. So that is a function of the desktop version right now, and we're gonna have to find out if or when this becomes something that we can do. But it's called Smart Reframe.
Okay.
And again, you can either allow the Smart Reframe option to automatically figure out. Like you said, it's the neural engine that's doing some of this smart reframing, right? So once we've told the neural engine, in this case, we've directed Smart Reframe with a rectangular window, and so this is the area you need to focus on. It's automatically going to keep that area of focus in our portrait mode video now, and it creates the keyframes for the translation, right, for the zoom and position. So
nice.
It does all of that, and so I'll have to ask if that's coming, because
that's coming,
that might be something we could have.
As far as artificial intelligence type stuff, are there other areas in the app that's kind of baked into? Like, can I search for water and it finds clips that have water? Or what other areas does AI touch within Resolve?
Yeah. So in some of our Resolve effects, we've used the neural engine features. That includes like facial recognition. So if you've seen the color effects for beauty and face recognition, what they're doing is they're recognizing the shapes, recognizing that those shapes together mean that they're a face, and then they're drawing all of these little different attributes that and regions that we can select to make changes to. So once face refinement has done the analysis, and we see that there's an eye orbit here, and there's a cheek here, it has the shape of the nose, then it opens up all these other attributes for us, like we can relight, we can add makeup in post. A lot of those things that we can do because DaVinci Resolve has recognized that's a face, that we now have the ability to lighten the eyes, sharpen the eyes a little bit, throw a little Robert Rodriguez style like highlight back into the eyes, for our focus. Especially when we're in the super close crop and the furtive eye look. We have all those options thanks to the DaVinci neural engine that's able to recognize that was a face. The other part I told you about was the people recognition, which again is finding people, recognizing faces, and then tracking them. If we've added keywords to any metadata fields, then we also have the option of automatically creating bins from those keywords as well. So those are kind of smart metadata driven tools. You had asked about the video stabilization, and there's the super scale option, which we kind of touched on when we were talking about the mismatch timeline output potential, right? You can use super scale, which is a DaVinci neural engine, upscaling, up resolution, formula, if you will. And then the video stabilization and the what's the other one? Super scale is a big one. Super scale is a very, very large one that we use this for. Object replacement.
Okay.
Because essentially we're training the neural engine to see the background of our object, and then we track a feature we'd like replaced. Yeah. And then we connect it to there, and then DaVinci Resolve creates the appropriate replacement background. Right. So object replacement is good for that. Um, we do a lot of really high-end effects actually in the Resolve effects. Resolve effects color. Ooh, hey, good catch, Sean. Well, we sync that one, and there we go.
Yeah.
Tighten you down. All right. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of those are DaVinci Neural Engine enhanced, and that's one of those things that is definitely an improvement once you're talking about the free versus the studio version.
Something I had a little chuckle about when I discovered is you guys have a boring detector in the timeline with some sleeping icons. Can you share a bit about what this is? What is boring?
I know it does seem like, are you asking for criticism right from your edit now? Is this really what you want?
Yeah.
But it's much simpler than that. In reality, what it does is when you enable the boring detector, and you'll find that it's also a long press that gives you some of the options that are on those little tools there. Well, once you've enabled the boring detector, it pops open the panel. The panel allows you to set, it's configurable for the duration of a clip that might be considered boring.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at your sequence and you've got, especially I would imagine in a talking head interview, if you've got the same primary talking head angle in there for too long, it's going to look like it's lacking enthusiasm or energy, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find a way to cut another angle in. So the boring detector is just a way for you to set a preference and say, hey, if any of my clips go over, 12 seconds or so on camera time, then light them up for me.
Yeah.
Right. And the other alternative tool that's in there that I find that's really quite useful for like QC work would be the flash frame analysis. So in the same tool, you have a flash frame option that says, if you find that there are edits that are shorter than X number of frames, and the default, I believe it's 5. If it's shorter than 5 frames, then please identify it for me.
Yeah.
Because I want to be able to go get that flash frame out.
Yeah.
And what it'll do is it'll light up the timeline. So you'll see is the timeline will be highlighted, and the darkened region will be the area that would be considered fine. The lighter region is now, oh no, I think you're boring.
We're here.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please look at this section. You're boring me to death. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And then as far as the 3D titles, is that full feature set there from the desktop app?
Like the Fusion titles?
Yeah.
Because what we have is if you look at titles in the cut page here as an example, these Fusion titles, there's basic titles, and then there's these animated. And so let's just grab one of the animated 3D titles, like the simple lower box, or there we go, slide in and scroll. So you just kind of drag that over, and then as you play back, it renders right off the bat from the GPU and plays in real time. Now, you're going to find that you can update these, right? When you select that clip and you go to the inspector, it again brings its tools. You're limited in terms of being a Fusion title because we don't have a Fusion page right now in the iPad version to, customize templates and things like that.
Yeah.
But, one of the great features actually with the desktop version of Resolve is the ability to create editorial template titles for your sequences, and then as you save those favorites, they could be saved with the kinds of customized tabs that your end user will be customizing. So you can give a preset and say, here, just use this preset. It'll only allow you to access the name or the title or the whatever. Like all the rest of those attributes have been completely controlled. And are hidden. So that's probably the way that I would see you might want to use that. And
then color grading. How extensive can this get? Can I make a Lord of the Rings kind of like heavily color graded video on the iPad?
I think you can. Yeah. I mean, as far as the color grading tools are concerned, what you'll find is that it's basically the same tool set, and there's been a slight rearrangement to gain access to the way that we modify some of those tools. And in the color page, as an example, when you're looking at the way that it's organized, you'll see that the tools from the far left on, the very first tool that you see down there is Camera Raw, right? Camera Raw gives us the ability to change the way that we're interpreting the raw media, so we can customize the delayer.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Next to that is where we get to our first color grading tool, which is essentially the primary color wheels. And in Resolve, that's going to be broken down into the 4 different attributes, right? It's the YRGB. So you'll see the rings control the hue, and then the slider underneath is essentially the luminance for all of those different 4 attributes. You move over one, you're in the HDR controls, and now the HDR controls offer an additional couple of levels of control within those ranges. In fact, if you click on the icon, you'll see that you can create a zone graph. So once you've enabled the HDR tools, you either have wheels that you're looking at or a zone graph. And the zone graph actually will allow you to customize how those tools cross over, so that if you're adjusting this side of one of those tools opposite this side, if they're right up against each other, then they push and pull. But if they overlap slightly, then you have this kind of a nice blend in between how you've adjusted, right? So you can adjust the zone graph on those. And then, of course, if you're familiar with color curves, we have the custom curves area that's still available. There's 6 different options that are preset, as well as being able to just customize your curve. And then there's the color warper, which is either a 6 vector or an 8 vector, shape that draws essentially the color signal. So as you hover over a clip, you'll see the direction of the signal, and you'll see the saturation of the signal, and you can grab, with the tools that are presented in that panel, and manipulate that signal in completely different ways. So in addition to that, you can export and import LUTs, right? In this case, if you've created a grade that you want to reuse, you might export it as a cube LUT, or you might create a gallery still, right? And then again, you can replay the gallery still to apply it to any other clip, or you can import the LUT, or once you've exported a LUT that you've created, you export it to the appropriate final path that the iPad is going to see, which is essentially the LUT path where it's installed now. And then that LUT will show up and be available as well. So you can do those things.
Are LUTs within photography the same as video? Like if you're editing a photo and you have LUTs set for that, if you want to kind of match it with the video you're working on, can you export from like a photo editor into here?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, because the LUT is essentially a way, it's just, the definition would be a lookup table, right? Which is essentially the way of transforming the pixel locations on a virtualized 3D plot in X, Y, and Z space. So across the 3 different dimensions of reality here, right? And so the X, Y, and Z coordinates then make up what where the pixel location is. So the pixel location then gets transformed from this coordinate to this coordinate in the LUT itself as a chart of numbers. So in a way, a LUT can be an easy way to begin work, because you're reordering all those pixels into the way that into an order that you want to start with. And in some cases, it can actually be, a limiting a workflow, because it is physically, it is an absolute transformation, if you will, right? It's a mathematical transformation.
Right. The HDR stuff would not fully translate, I'd imagine.
It's difficult to represent the dynamic range, right? In the narrow environment of a video signal. So the dynamic range right now that is in the clips themselves, it's in the source media themselves. The dynamic range is all courtesy of the camera. So when the camera created that, the sensor was able to grab as much data as possible, provided you've properly filled the sensor with data and you weren't clipping when you recorded it. This is the kind of thing that if you're recording in RAW, you have this full feature in post-production to completely change every way that you interpreted that raw pixel, right? But if you've recorded a burned or a fixed format, then you hope that you've not clipped your content. But there's a way to do so that you can at least preserve some of the highlight data, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was the workflow that a lot of people were using. It's called log, right? It's a logarithmic compression of the linear signal. So if the linear signal starts at the lower left corner of the curves dialog and the top right corner of the curves dialog and makes a straight line from 0 to 1, 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or 0, 0 to 1, 1, that represents the full scale of that direction, right?
Yeah.
Of all of the media itself. Well, if you were to take the halfway point and then start to curve it up, then what you've done is you've taken from 0 to 50% is now maybe a lesser amount of the actual signal, but from 50% to 100 represents a greater amount of the signal. So there's actually more gradation in between.
Yeah.
So this is the trick that essentially log allows you to open up with, preserving some of the highlights or some of the shadow details. Well, HDR is going to be HDR all the time when it's in Resolve, and it's only going to be limited by what you've chosen to output at the end. So that's also the beauty of Resolve, and the fact that it's a 32-bit floating point calculation. It's not going to crop or loss or lose any of that data in the process of transforming it for your looks. Now, instead of using a LUT for a color grading workflow, if, however, you choose to use the raw media, make a slight raw adjustment in the camera raw panel, and then do your work from raw, Resolve automatically, when you've engaged color management, reads the raw metadata and has been provided all of this information from our camera manufacturers directly. So if it's Sony and Arri, they've told us specifically what their formula is and how to decode it. So we've got their formula and we've got all that data. And when we recognize that from the metadata, we simply apply it. So you'll find that if you're in a color managed workflow, that you have, that your raw just looks beautiful already.
Yeah.
And you can start from that beautiful place to make your adjustments, and then to go, if you really want to dirty it up and go noir and take away some of the saturation, you can totally do all of that. But you have all of the data available underneath the hood at any point to change your output later.
Yeah. And then as far as HDR, how does the app handle it on the iPad? Like if I'm on an XDR iPad Pro, is my preview an HDR on the iPad? If I hook up to an HDR compatible monitor, will that output show the real HDR? Or like, what's that like?
Yeah. So I've only done single screen iPad Pro HDR work right now because this 12.9 includes the XDR scene, and it's beautiful. I did attempt with my adapter to do Stage Manager, and I added another external monitor, like an HDMI monitor. But it's kind of a very inexpensive kind of a business display, if you will. Good for spreadsheets and things like that. So I formatted my business apps on it. I put my mail was on it, my Skype was on it, and then I had all my tools over there, and I left Resolve on the iPad screen. Yeah. So I'm not so sure yet what we have capable of, and I guess it would also be determined by what level of support we might have in the future with some of our video hardware devices. Because in our workflow, we're typically expecting the customer that is going to be, grading a professional job for deliverable to have an external monitor and that's professionally calibrated and a video signal that can guarantee you're going to send it 10 bits. Minimum. Okay? Usually that means that in Resolve, we're working with our own Blackmagic hardware. But on the iPad, I don't know that we have any video I/O options as of yet. I have not been briefed on them, so hopefully we'll get those soon.
Yeah, and the one thing I really hope to see in the future, if you could pass this on to your team, I'm not sure if if they're working on this, is the external monitor editing scenario. I'd love to work on my iPad, then get to my desk, plug in my iPad to the big screen, and have DaVinci Resolve kind of scale up with a much bigger window when I'm there. Do you know any information about that situation?
Oh, I really don't. And, it's really not in our nature to share those kinds of
Yeah.
roadmap notes anyway. But no, I'm not really privy to that. I would imagine that there's many discussions in the product management and development team right now about how to do just what you're describing, because I have a couple of, 32-inch 4K screens that I would personally like to be able to attempt that with as well, create kind of a working dock,
Yeah.
if you will.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I had been doing that with my laptop anyway. Like my laptop goes to a dock, and then all my screens pop up, and
Yeah.
and it connects to my hardware devices and everything, because I have a 4K Ultra Studio Mini, 4K
Mhm.
Mini, not the Mini, 4K Mini, which is the full size 6G capable. It does 12G, but it also does dual 6G. It does not do quad 3G. But,
Yeah.
so I have that connected to a the Dell Precision Color for
Yeah.
my video output directly.
Yeah. Yep. Very cool. I was just curious on that. And then Dolby Vision is like, as far as exporting your video, and any special notes as far as getting HDR as the exported video file?
Like exporting to HDR, if you use the output format and you pick the correct color management environment. So let's go to the examples here. If I go to project settings and I go to color management, and let me get out of that project because I'm in the wrong one. Let's go to this one. Yeah, the cloud works very nicely, actually.
Yeah.
Very, very, very happy with my cloud one. Okay, so when you switch from color manage, in the color management panel, you have the DaVinci WireGB and DaVinci WireGB color managed, as well as the two flavors of ACES that are there, the ACES CC and CCT. Now, when you're in the color managed environment, you can either choose the automatic color management, or you can choose a bespoke setting, right, where you decide all of those attributes. You want to be very specific about what your input format is. You want to be very specific about what the editing timeline format is. And you want to be very specific about what the output format is for your deliverable. So if you tick the box off that says automatic color management, then you can do all of those things. So you can simply choose your color processing mode and your output color space, and even separate the space from the gamma if you wanted. So you can have the gamma and the gamut, separate, right?
Yeah.
But in my estimation, most people are probably going to stick with the automatic color management, and then you have a very simple option. You choose SDR or HDR.
Okay.
And then in your output space, you have, again, the same options, SDR or HDR, but there's 5 different flavors there. So if you were probably, in most cases, you're going to be delivering to HDR PQ, if that means you deliver to a 600 nit or a 1000 nit or both deliverables, then this would be your setup. You would go color managed, choose color processing mode HDR, and choose HDR PQ. Then the little option underneath that tells it how many nits that is. It's just a metadata flag. Then you did say, we're talking about the ability to do like Dolby Vision.
Yeah.
So I have not upgraded mine yet. I'm still trying to get all of my codes from everyone so I can get my studio code on here and enable the Dolby Vision. But what that does is it opens the Dolby Vision tool set.
Okay.
And that provides you with level 1 analysis. So the Dolby Vision that's included with the studio version of Resolve includes this level 1 analysis, which is essentially a static metadata, and it's the per clip analysis that you're going to be doing primarily.
Yeah.
Right? That gets you the 3 different attributes. One would be the max CLL, right? So the max content light level.
Yeah.
The max frame average light level, and then the minimum.
Okay.
Right. So those 3 attributes are then written to the metadata in that format, so that you can export, and a Dolby Vision device will recognize that you have a Dolby Vision metadata there, and it will understand how, with your minimum and your maximum and your average, how to draw in whatever device that you have, because it's always device dependent at the end of the process, right? What screen am I looking at? So,
gotcha. And then one of the last questions here. Dolby Atmos is something I think it would just be, sounds incredible to be mastering audio in that way. The Mac version does this. I would love to have AirPods Max or some kind of crazy speaker setup with the iPad. I just want to mention that would be awesome if the developers can figure that one out.
Okay, I will definitely note that. Yeah, because that does. I mean, I think the iPad itself offers spatial audio.
It does, for music.
AirPods, right?
Yeah. And there's no, there are currently no apps I've seen, audio editor or otherwise, that let you. I'd love to edit in Dolby Atmos, in spatial audio, just to play around with that.
Sure.
That seems fun. Yeah.
And it does sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and on the Mac, it does it through you're like rearranging different sound sources in kind of a graphical manner.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the desktop version, there's a couple of things. There's like a 3D scope option, right? And you'll be able to pan around in the 3D space. And also in one of those views, the space scope view, essentially, when you've got objects that have been defined as objects, you'll now see the objects in that view, kind of representing as they light up. You'll see them light up. So, and then of course that pairs nicely with the full Fairlight hardware, for moving panners and things like that, and then automating the faders with the automation routines that are available in Fairlight. So
very cool. And then anything we covered a bunch. Anything that we didn't cover that you just want to touch on real quick?
Well, let's see. We did talk about the desktop version in the studio and the formats, and yep. Let's see what else we have here. I don't know that we have anything left to cover, but I mean, I would just say I'm really excited. I'm excited to see where the team takes this product. It's always great as a representative of the software and of the hardware and of the company to be able to point to our multi-platform capability. Right, we offer software available to several different workflows. We're not picking one over the other. So pick the tool that you like best or that you need to use for whatever it is. I'm just really excited to see where we go with the iPad version, because like you said, there are so many other places that that we could entertain that there's probably an awful lot of people like you that would be excited about it. So.
No, it's an exciting moment to have this app on iPad, and I was very excited when the M2 iPad Pro was revealed. It was like just a little tiny screenshot. It's like, DaVinci Resolve's coming. It's like, okay, this is.
I know. It's great to get that little name drop directly from Apple about their software too. So,
For someone brand new to DaVinci Resolve, where's the best place to go to watch tutorials and learn how to best use this app?
I would say that's probably our website. It's probably two places. It's probably our website. But we've also been creating a YouTube repository with some of these video training, examples as well.
Okay.
But if you look at our website, there's a full DaVinci Resolve subsite. The navigation underneath the subsite includes an option for training. And when you click on the training button on the navigation, you'll find an entire page full of training videos and even our official training book series, which is available, freely downloadable. Like our software, you can just download the training book and learn at your own pace. It even includes links to the media itself. That's all, proxy media, lightweight, so that you can work on the exact media and follow along exactly with the official training series. So they're probably, and then the YouTube, to keep checking our YouTube page as we add. And of course, when you're on YouTube, smash that like and subscribe button, right?
Yes.
That's how it works. That's what you have to say every time we see YouTube.
Yes.
Like and subscribe.
Yep. That's what you do. Yeah. Thank you, Shawn. I do really appreciate your time. I know we went probably a little bit over what I expected, but thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. And thanks for having me. It's a great time. Appreciate it.
Well, that's my discussion with Shawn. My thanks to Shawn for his time recording, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. Learn more about DaVinci Resolve over at blackmagicdesign.com and download it today for free in the App Store to get started. You can support this podcast over patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.